All right, let's go to a new guest. I've been excited to have this conversation. This is in. I just want to give him a good bio. Ahmed Omar, host of MENA Unleashed on YouTube. I'm sorry, MENA Unleashed on Twitter. He does fantastic work. His analysis is just spot on, especially on Middle Eastern conflicts. He's an expert in political economy who works as a consultant with governments and IGOs. Um, Ahmed, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for joining me. Oh, wait, I can't hear you. Mike.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me.
No, man, you have really good analysis. And I was excited when you told me that you was willing to come on. You wrote a post, and just so the audience can see what I am looking at, I don't want them to be in the lurch. Right here, MENA Unleashed.
You got many posts. So
yeah, you're right, many posts. But your analysis is very good, which is why I'm glad you could join me on this. And you were having a conversation about basically the aftermath of what is taking place in Gaza. Basically, like what is to come, what is the expectation to come, or at the very least, what is the ideas that people are coming up with. And you pointed out, you said yesterday the EU made one of its largest financial contributions to Egypt, $7.9 billion, to secure Cairo's complicity in the Trump peace plan, in quotes, and the disarmament of Hamas. Now, many of the people that I spoke to would say that there is no way that those governments, be it Egypt, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, that these governments were really going to create a military force to put onto the ground. And some of the reporting came out that these governments were concerned that they would be seen as effectively being in military for Israel, which is deeply humiliating, as you can imagine. But as you point out, with the amount of money that they're effectively giving Egypt has all sorts of domestic issues that Egypt is having difficulty dealing with. This money is going to go into their coffers. It's needed by Egypt. What is going to be the effect of this? I mean, will this money really compel Egypt to get more involved in, let's say, the after effects, this kind of disarmament of Hamas and this kind of whatever is to come next post-Hamas governance? That's assuming they even get to that point.
Sure.
Give me your thoughts on this.
Sure. Well, obviously, thank you again for hosting me, and I hope that you will find my contribution useful and your audience as well. So I think an important thing to highlight here before I kind of delve into the specifics of the question is that we have been here before. This is not the first time this has happened. Pretty much in every single kind of historical junction that Palestine and Israel have had sort of like a major kind of event, whether that be the Oslo Accord, the 2008 war, the 2003 war, the 2014 war. In every single kind of historical junctures, there's been always this sort of debate, multilateral work, trying to establish a donors mechanism, and that donor mechanism is supposed to somehow to be linked to some political process which would ultimately lead to a Palestinian state. If you recall, after 2008, there was a huge also Egypt-sponsored reconstruction conference, which promised Hamas, if I recall correctly, about $6 billion, if not $8 billion at the time, in exchange for them disarming, believing in the Oslo Accords and submitting to the Oslo Accords and becoming part of the PA forces. So what they're trying to do here now is sort of like trying to revisit or trying to rework something that hasn't worked in the past. That is to establish an international governance mechanism, which would be essentially in charge of Gaza administration instead of Palestinians administering the Strip themselves or other more friendly organizations like the UNRWA. But even the notion that Egypt will be part of this armament, be part of this political transition and process is a bit elusive, because also I believe the Israelis have their own version of this. They believe that they themselves should be the coordinator of how the transaction ultimately happens on the ground. If you recall, there was some official remarks by U.S. officials in a couple of days ago saying that the reconstruction money will ultimately be spent in the area that Israel control, where Hamas does exist. So effectively, we're looking at this small strip of land that is being disputed by so many countries, and each is trying to influence them. A side which is sort of like the eastern side is divided and controlled by Israel, and it has militias and clans which are loyal to Israel, funded by Israel, and sort of sponsored essentially by the IDF. And that's the side that the United States and Israel want to work with. They don't want to work with UNRWA. They don't want to work with the EU. They don't want to work with the Egyptians or the Arabs. This is, not something they are willing to do. And you have another track and another division, which is in the sort of like the west of Gaza, that would be sort of linked to Egypt. That it would be the process that is sort of pursued by the EU, the Saudi Arabians, and the Emiratis, and the goal would ultimately be to divide Gaza into two realities, and the reality that wins ultimately will be the reality of Gaza. Talking about Palestine is not something except in the sense that it's a theoretical thing, not something real. And Egypt ultimately, I think, in its vision, sees this as good politics, in the sense that they have politically succeeded without engaging in war or in circumventing Israeli plans for Gaza. Would that has be like straight, kind of like this expulsion of people and complete occupation of the Strip. That has kind of been stopped politically, at least, not militarily. But now the next step, the day after, is, in my opinion, a very highly disputed and debated topic among all these actors that theoretically have signed up to this plan. Indonesia and Pakistan, for crying out loud, are signatories to this.
But wait, how does this work, though? I mean, for all intents and purposes, Israel is still occupying parts of Gaza. They're still murdering people on the ground on a daily basis. They're still withholding food trucks. And for the U.S. to say, okay, Witkoff and Kushner recently in an interview mentioned, yeah, we're expecting $40 billion. Okay, but as you just pointed out, they're talking about $40 billion in areas that are effectively occupied by Israel. So it's not like the Israeli military is leaving anytime soon.
No, not particularly. And also the nice parts of the land are the ones by the sea. And these are the areas that Israel will be withdrawing from, and Israel withdrew from. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think either sides. So let's think of the Trump peace plan as a greater banner. It's something you say, right? But like the specifics of it is something that is up for grabs. So each actor that has said, we back this plan, is essentially in a process of trying to sort of put the details of the plan in action so that it becomes the plan.
I see.
So like the Saudis and their view of the plan is different than the Turks, is different than the Iranians, is different than the Europeans. All these countries supported this plan. Iran supported the plan, by the way, like publicly on public record, Iran backed the Trump plan. But Trump plan doesn't ultimately mean that Israeli wishes or Egyptian wishes or European wishes or Saudi wishes will ultimately triumph. What just has happened is that they got sick of a hardcore military confrontation. So now they went and moved the battlefield and the warfare to the political and economic and social realm. And that's what they are actually doing. All the talks about how much money theoretically can be channeled into Gaza are really nice talks, which have happened in the past. If you recall, in 2020, when Trump announces deal of the century, the Peace for Prosperity deal, it was also talked about that they will be giving Gazans lots of money and that they will integrate the West Bank into the Israeli economy and make Palestine closer to independence. Realistically speaking, as you and the audience have monitored over the past years, Israeli settlements have increased. Israel was preparing and planning for a genocide and a regional multi-theater war. So, in my opinion, all this talk about peace is just essentially a way to say there is going to be a regional war. And because we don't have an answer for Gaza, because we don't have an actual solution for Gaza that will satisfy all these different actors who have different perspectives and different views on how this kind of should play out, I think what the United States is saying that if you support my regional agenda, if you support my approach to things, you will ultimately win in Gaza, but obviously after other kind of regional issues have been addressed, such as Iran, Hezbollah, Syria situation, Iraq, Yemen situation. There's many. You see more movement also in Libya and Sudan. So the United States is setting an agenda by throwing out these claims about this money. That money doesn't exist, Jamaro. They are talking about something that doesn't exist, will never exist. Nobody will go out of their way to reconstruct Gaza when they know that Israel will destroy it again. What is happening now is similar to what happened in 2014, after the war. Essentially, Israel decided that it doesn't and is unable to continue the physical war, and is transferring the warfare responsibility to other aspects, such as the political, the economic. There's lots of dispute about the so-called economic committee, who's going to form that committee, the international stabilization force, for example, who's going to be part of that force, what is going to be the mandate of that force. For example, the Turks and the Egyptians think of this force as a stabilization force, but Israel and the United States think of this ISF force more as an sort of like a substitute for occupation, somebody that will come in, demilitarize Hamas, and establish like their kind of fulfill the Israeli goals in Gaza. So in my opinion, there is lots of big talks thrown around by many people nowadays, especially like presidents of countries. But in my opinion, I don't think this is real. I think this is political posturing, theatrics, in preparation for sorting out other issues in the region. Then ultimately, depending on that, the situation in Gaza will be decided. So, for example, if Iran loses ultimately, then Hamas will have to come to them with the fact that they lost the war, and there is a regional system led by the US. It's called the Abraham Alliance. It's a kind of a US-led market which gives economic corridors to many actors that kind of rely on the US guarantee of security to maintain their existing economic and business relationships. And ultimately, they will be at least not friends with China and Russia.
Wait, so you say if Iran loses, so you're assuming that there's going to be a war, that Israel may have... No, go ahead, please.
I'm not just assuming. There's so many kind of reports, government officials from both Israeli side and the Iranian side and other kind of actors. But if I would like to highlight the Israel Abraham Shield plan. It's an important plan that was launched about a year ago by sort of like a coalition of Israeli and American military generals. And the plan essentially talks about different aspects of how Israel views the Israeli security architecture in the region and how the plan should play out. So in the beginning, it talks about Gaza, and they've kind of like done things the way they wanted in Gaza, but then it talks about Iran, talks about Lebanon, talks about Syria, talks about normalization with Saudi Arabia. So I think what we are anticipating in the near term isn't necessarily a resolution or a peace plan or an actual reconstruction of Gaza, but more that the war in Gaza will be put in hiatus, for sort of relative hiatus, for a brief time until they figure out the other kind of broader aspects of the plan. So, for example, we're anticipating MBS to go to DC to potentially sort of like straighten the Saudi point of view on normalization. We're looking at also what will happen with the Iranian nuclear program. The Israelis and the Americans seem to assess that there is potential for another military strike, which will bring the Iranian kind of government into alliance with the Abraham Alliance, right? That's what they envisage. We also have about we need to see what happens with the Houthis and Hezbollah. So Israel, and the Saudis have been supplying more weapons recently to Houthis opposition in Yemen and Sana'a, and trying essentially to try to militarily turn the balance against them, because ultimately one of the reasons why the Houthis could blockade Israel is because they have quite strong control on the ground about their territories, which allows them to spread out their manufacturing facilities, their attacking sites, which enables them to be kind of strongly resilient vis-a-vis the US restrictions. So, in my opinion, what is happening at the moment is that we have few things being put in hiatus, which is particularly the direct Gaza conflict, whilst other topics are being discussed and are being played out. I particularly found it of interest that Indonesia and Pakistan became part of the Abraham Accords, just like this.
Yes.
And they didn't even tell anybody. They didn't even tell their own people, Pakistanis and Indonesians don't know that their leaders have essentially said, oh, we'd like to be part of the Abraham Alliance. And essentially to be in bed with the Israelis. That's not an issue for us.
Yeah.
In terms of that,
The Indonesia thing was weird because if you remember, the prime minister of Indonesia goes to Trump and says, I feel insecure. Effectively, we have security issues. Now, this is immediately after, of course, all of the protests were taking place all throughout Indonesia.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's a belief when you see a protest that has this kind of ring of color revolution to it, especially when you look at Nepal and you look at some of the fires that were set in some of these other countries. It is very strange that he goes to Trump and said, can I talk to your son? Well, obviously, talking to his son is, let's make some kind of fiduciary connection that will give me some kind of influence within the context of your administration. But it was the way he said it, though. He was like, I feel we have security issues.
Yeah.
I feel insecure. Can I talk to your kid?
I think this scenario played out so many times in the region and around the world. We already know, that not only that the US does this, but many other countries as well do this when they believe that they can pressure an adversary or a potential ally or a potential friend because they believe they can use that to get some political concessions and
Right.
issues they can concede on. So, for example, the same thing happened with Algeria and Morocco, right? Just in the past couple of months, we've seen many more demonstrations happening in Morocco and happening in Algeria. But the reason why they're happening isn't being particularly discussed politically, but I do believe that it has to do with the political maneuver that the United States is trying to do there with related to Sahara and the peace there. Because as you can probably notice that there's been lots of movement there, and I believe they're essentially trying to do this. Back to our context in the Gaza context, I believe definitely this has to do with political stability concerns. In the context of Indonesia and Pakistan. As you saw, there is a bit of kind of social unrest in the region, and they foresee that the United States ultimately may try to pressure their government, their economies into making concessions, and hence they are trying to preempt that. But I think another important thing that is playing out, which is overlooked here, is that India and the US relationships have worsened in the past couple of months. India was seen by many American analysts and strategists as a strong ally against China, but over the past, essentially in 2025, the United States has tried to pressure Russia on buying weapons, food, and energy from Russia. And the Indians said, no, we are not going to accept that. We have the right to buy oil from wherever we think is cheaper for us, where we can afford it most. And economics make a lot of difference for India, given its large volume population. So buying from sources other than Russia, it means that they will have markup the price that they pay, and they don't want to do that because the Indian economy is not doing great itself. So hence they are not really interested in this. But I think expanding the Abraham Accords into Asia and making Asian economies part of this sort of order is not isolated from the United States competition with China. Ultimately, what the US essentially indirectly told China that whatever happens in the Middle East will decide what happens in Asia as well. And whatever happens in Asia, it will decide with what happens in the Middle East. So now there is sort of like, I wouldn't call it a unity of frontier, but more like an increased interconnectiveness of the conflicts in Asia and the conflicts in the Middle East, and even to a larger extent, Africa. But like,
wait. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry to interrupt. It sounds like you're saying that China has made somewhat of a mistake or a miscalculation by not getting more involved in Middle Eastern affairs because the U.S. is effectively using what is taking place in the Middle East to expand and cut into China's influence. Am I getting that right?
Exactly.
Oh,
That's what
that
I've
is so
been trying.
interesting.
That's actually what I've been trying to say for quite a while now. Is that China has overlooked Gaza way too much. It's a major geopolitical event which is affecting and influencing all the actors in the region, whether that be they be China's friends or foes. But at the end of the day, we've seen very careful, highly calibrated Chinese engagement with the war. For example, like China is the largest trade partner of Israel, remains
Yes.
to be the case after the US, obviously, even after the war. So we haven't even seen politically symbolic moves such as claiming that we're not gonna send dual use items to Israel. That we didn't even get that from China. And I think by that the Chinese, I think, wanted to stay isolated, like keep the Asian conflict, Taiwan conflict, India conflict sorry, separate from what happens in the Middle East, because whilst the Middle East is important for us, it's only important for us in terms of energy access and market access. What the United States has done recently is telling China, no, if you want to win this, you have to win it all. You either lose it all or you win it all. And that has changed the kind of the dynamics of the conflict and essentially brought Gaza conflict from a regional one into a global one about supremacy, about who has better tech, who has better politics, outreach, networks, access to legal systems, ability to weaponize the different kind of advantage that the country have. And that's what we are increasingly seeing. It's not a random coincidence that after Gaza conflict ended, China declared a rare earth embargo on the United States and its allies. And I think, and as the Chinese have said, this is related to global peace, because a lot of these kind of material ultimately end up into weapon systems that aid the United States foreign policy, which the Chinese view as aggressive. And something very important that happened also this year is Israel has publicly tried to interfere in Taiwan and is essentially officially urging the United States to accept Taiwan as an independent state. For China, another element, and this is related to conspiracy theory, but we're seeing more Chinese discussion around this online, is the money and the finance. That we are seeing that because of the strong link between Jewish families and many financial institutions in the United States and the global economy, many in China are viewing Israel in a hostile way because they view that the US is in a constant financial war against China. Hence, they view themselves as also victims of this global Zionist, Israel imperialist kind of conspiracy. And this is increasingly becoming a stronger sentiment in China, especially since the war, as they see the escalation between the both countries take into not just economic elements, but also political elements. We are seeing it in public record that that the Israelis have advocated for Taiwan and Taiwan independence, and we are seeing the Chinese government retaliating against Zionist churches in China, which is something that has been kind of like in the news in the past couple of days. So we are clearly seeing that the honeymoon between China and the Jewish community is narrowing down. Nonetheless, I think China lacks a strategy to deal with that with these issues. So realistically speaking, you can't say, okay, I don't like Israel policy, but then at the same time, I also discourage all the counter policies in the region. When there is like a social movement in Egypt, I don't support the revolution. When there is political regime somewhere, we take a side that is with the counter-revolution. And I think the Chinese have to make a decision now. They have to take the Middle East seriously. They have to take the stability and the future of this region and the politics and the architecture that is being formulated as we speak as critical and detrimental to the future of China. This is not a domestic issue to the Middle East. This is not a domestic issue to China. The globalization of economy, technology, warfare, politics, ethics, morality is making the world a one village, whether we like it or not, for better or for worse. And the traditionalist thinking that I can just sit on the side as a great power and do nothing in the Middle East, hoping that this will mean stability in Asia, this no longer works. This is just wishful dreams, and escalation in the Middle East or peace in the Middle East will affect Asia and vice versa. And I think we have to see more like China and also more broadly a BRICS expanded strategy, realistic strategy in terms of how they view the future of Gaza, because it's obviously the door for how things play out, but also more broadly how the global relationships will have to be formulated around either Israeli politics or Palestinian politics.
Great point. Oh, that is a great point. And it's a point, we're going to have to close it, but that's a point that I have not heard many people make. Like, for all intents and purposes, China seem to believe that they could just kind of, well, we don't want to get involved. We'll continue our trade. We'll say that we don't like the genocide, but we'll continue our trade, dual use items or otherwise, and we'll just stay out of it. As if the Middle East was this kind of glass vase or in a box or something. And it sounds, your point is that's not the case. That the way that the United States is effectively engaging this is also now dipping into Asia with this kind of Abraham Accords. China can't necessarily stay on the sidelines if indeed it wants to ensure its own, let's say, economic integrity. I'm going to have to bring you back because we're going to have to dig further into this. Thank you for this, man. Ahmed Omar, he is host of MENA Unleashed. Check it out on Twitter. They are fantastic. As regard to outlet, he's an expert in political economy who's worked as a consultant with government and NGOs. Got to bring you back, man. This wasn't long enough.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed my participation, and I hope.
No, man. Thank you for this. I will definitely try to bring you back, hopefully next week if you're available. But we'll touch base. Thank you for this.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Be safe.